So what do a 16th century English playwright and the absolute bleeding edge of 21st century sports biomechanics have in common?
Yeah, I mean, it really does sound like the setup to a strange historical joke.
It totally does. But the answer to that question is, well, it's going to completely reframe how you look at high-stakes situations.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you are, stepping onto a tennis court, walking into a massive corporate presentation, or just trying to keep your hands from shaking when literally everything is on the line.
Because the overlap between classical theater and modern human performance data is, well, it's profound. Once you actually see the connection, it just becomes the lens through which you view every high pressure moment.
Right, and that is exactly the focus of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are looking at this incredible presentation from Dr. Christophe Delong in Kinexa formation. It's titled William Shakespeare, the Master of Performance Under Pressure.
Which is just a great title, honestly. So good. And our mission today is to explore how Shakespeare's theatrical genius actually mirrors modern clinical studies of human performance under maximum emotional tension. Yeah, and we're also going to look at how a modern technological system, this thing called Kinexa, is tracking the exact physical breakdowns that Shakespeare intuitively observed in his actors, over 400 years ago.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Uh-huh.
Because I think we need to start with the literal foundation of this idea. The concept that internal stress doesn't just stay in your head. It physically manifests in your body.
Right. And to understand that, we really have to look at the environment Shakespeare was working in. I mean, he wasn't sitting in some isolated, quiet room writing abstract philosophy.
No, not at all.
He was an actor, and he was a director at the Globe Theatre in London, so he lived and breathed the actual physical realities of live performance.
Well, he has that famous quote, right, from his 1599 play, As You Like It. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. And people usually quote that to sound, I don't know, kind of philosophical about the roles we play in society. But Dr. Delong's presentation takes it much more literally.
It does. The presentation argues that for Shakespeare, the human body was quite literally a stage.
Like a physical location.
Exactly. It's the physical location where completely invisible internal conflicts become highly visible gestures. Just think about the constraints of the Globe Theatre back then.
Right. No special effects.
Exactly. You are directing actors on a wooden platform. There is no atmospheric lighting. There's no musical score to swell during a sad scene. And there are certainly no camera close-ups to catch a subtle tear on an actor's face.
You're just kind of out there in the daylight.
You're out there. So the only way to convey a character's internal psychological collapse to someone standing, say, 50 feet away is through their biomechanics.
Oh, wow.
Through their posture, their timing, the way they distribute their weight on the stage. Shakespeare was basically forced to pay microscopic attention to how the human body reacts to stress and fear and ambition.
That makes so much sense. And the sources highlight two very specific, kind of extreme examples of this clinical observation in his work, Hamlet and Macbeth.
The classic example.
Right. So let's start with Hamlet. You have this character utterly defined by hesitation. The presentation specifically notes his closed postures, his inward physical collapse, and his completely incoherent gestures.
Yeah, he just shrinks into himself. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Macbeth.
Who is totally different.
Completely. Macbeth doesn't freeze or shrink. He trembles. He has this evasive, darting gaze. And his gestures are wildly too fast.
Manic.
Yeah, you are watching a nervous system completely over-rev its engine.
It's so easy to map those two extremes onto completely modern, everyday, high-stakes scenarios. Like, imagine you were trying to parallel park on a really narrow street.
Oh, the worst.
The absolute worst. And suddenly a line of angry drivers forms right behind you, and they're honking their horns. The pressure just spikes.
You can feel it immediately.
Exactly. And you generally see people react in one of those two Shakespearean ways. You either go full Hamlet, you freeze up, you grip the steering wheel, but you don't actually move it.
Right.
You shrink down in your seat, and you just second-guess even putting the car in reverse.
Or
you go full Macbeth. You get incredibly jittery, your eyes are darting everywhere between all the mirrors, and you slam on the gas too hard, you rush the process and end up bumping the curb.
what's fascinating here is that Shakespeare wasn't just writing compelling drama. He was effectively conducting a clinical study of the human body under pressure.
Without any of the modern tools.
Right. Centuries before, we had the biomechanical vocabulary or, the neurological tools to actually explain them.
That's incredible.
When Macbeth's gaze is evasive and his movements are rushed, that is a highly accurate representation of an overloaded nervous system prioritizing speed over accuracy because it feels threatened.
And Hamlet is the opposite.
Exactly. When Hamlet is exhibiting closed postures and hesitations, that is the physical reality of a motor system that has literally been shut down by cognitive overload.
Okay, so if Shakespeare was observing the outer symptoms of this collapse, what is actually happening under the hood? Like, biologically?
Right, the neuroscience.
Yeah, that brings us to the science of choking. Because everyone knows the visceral feeling of choking under pressure, but the mechanics of why it happens are fascinating. And again, the sources take us right back to Hamlet, to be or not to be.
It's a line everyone knows, but Dr. Delong's presentation reframes it entirely.
How so?
Well, in the context of biomechanics and performance, to be or not to be isn't a philosophical musing about life and death. It actually represents a physical inability to trigger movement.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it is the ultimate expression of what sports neuroscientists call paralysis by analysis.
Okay, let's get into the clinical data that validates that 16th century observation. Because the presentation cites this landmark research by Bylock and Carr from 2001.
Right, which breaks down the mechanics of human failure.
Exactly. And it really comes down to two different operating systems running in our brains, right?
Yeah, you essentially have System 1 and System 2. So System 1 is automatic, it's incredibly fast, and it operates entirely below your conscious awareness.
It's the autopilot.
Exactly, the autopilot. And then you have System 2, which is conscious, deliberate, analytical, and frankly, comparatively very slow.
So System 1 is what you use when you're just like walking down the street.
Yeah.
You aren't calculating the exact angle of your knee or the strike of your heel.
Right. But System 2 is what you use when you are learning a complicated new tango step, and you have to think about exactly where to place your left foot.
Got it. And the research shows a really clear distinction in how people fail based on their skill level. For beginners, they crack under pressure because they lack that System 1 automation.
I haven't built the autopilot yet.
Right. They have to rely on the slow conscious System 2. So the cognitive load just gets too high, they get overwhelmed, and the movement just falls apart.
But the danger for highly trained experts is entirely different and honestly much more insidious.
How's it different?
Experts don't crack because they lack automation. The presentation points out that they crack because they suddenly become conscious of movements that should be automatic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the term Dr. Delong uses is brilliant. He says they literally Hamletize their movement.
I just struggle to understand the biological logic of that, though.
Yeah.
Like, if a professional tennis player has hit a specific serve 10,000 times, that movement is essentially hardwired into their body.
Completely hardwired.
So why would the brain suddenly decide to sabotage its own hardwiring and micromanage the muscles just because it happens to be a match point?
Because the brain is, at its core, an evolutionary survival machine, and it perceives a threat.
A threat, like the pressure of the match.
Yes. When the emotional tension peaks, like when the championship is on the line, or a massive crowd goes completely silent, the brain's self-preservation instinct kicks in.
So it panics.
Essentially, yes. The stakes feel so incredibly high that the brain actually stops trusting the automatic system. It demands conscious control to ensure no mistakes are made.
Oh, that is so counterproductive.
Extremely. Ironically, that very act of conscious control is what causes the mistake. The slow System 2 overrides the fast System 1. The brain forces the body to hesitate, just like Hamlet, completely disrupting the motor schemas that took years to build.
So your brain tries to save you by grabbing the steering wheel, but it doesn't actually know how to drive the car as well as your body does.
That is a perfect analogy, yes. But the goal in human performance isn't just to avoid being Hamlet.
Because there's another extreme.
Right. If you push too far away from that conscious hesitation, you end up at the other extreme we discussed, Macbeth. You fall into emotional overactivation where ambition, fear, and adrenaline trigger responses that are just too fast and poorly controlled.
So where's the middle ground?
The sources identify the space between these two extremes as the IZOF. That stands for the individual zone of optimal functioning.
The sweet spot.
Yep.
You aren't completely inhibited and frozen in thought like Hamlet, but you aren't manic and rushing the outcome like Macbeth.
Exactly. You are perfectly tuned to the required activation level for whatever the task is.
Right. But identifying that a player fell out of their IZOFs after they missed the game-winning shot isn't particularly helpful to a coach in the moment, like it's already over.
Which is exactly the problem modern biomechanics is trying to solve. To prevent the Macbeth rush or the Hamlet freeze, you need a way to look inside the athlete's nervous system while they are still on the field before the failure actually happens.
And that brings us to Kinexa. The presentation refers to this system as the dramaturge du mouvement, the playwright of movement. It is designed to actually measure these internal emotional states in real time.
It's incredible technology, and it operates on a very profound principle. The body simply doesn't lie under pressure.
Even if the athlete is trying to hide it.
Right. An athlete might mask their stress on their face or confidently tell their coach they feel fine, but their internal emotional state alters their kinematic schemas in highly measurable ways.
Let's define kinematic schema for a moment, just because that's a pretty dense term.
Sure. Think of a kinematic schema as a zipped file on your computer or an autopilot program.
Okay.
When you throw a baseball, your brain doesn't send 1,000 individual commands saying, contract shoulder, rotate hip, extend elbow, flick wrist.
That would take too long.
Way too long. It just clicks on one file, the throw schema, and the whole sequence unzips and plays out automatically.
But when an athlete feels pressure, before they even consciously register it as stress, the body begins to prepare for a threat, and that file basically gets corrupted.
Yes.
And the sources specifically mention defensive co-contractions as one of the physical betrayals.
Yeah, so a defensive co-contraction is essentially your body's armor going up. Imagine getting startled by something. You might instinctively flex both your bicep and your tricep at the exact same time.
Just to brace yourself.
Exactly, you are locking the joint to protect it. But when muscles that should be firing sequentially start fighting each other like that, even on a microscopic level, you lose the smooth kinetic chain of the movement.
So what exactly is Kinexa measuring to catch that internal battle? Because the presentation outlines 3 specific signatures of choking that the system tracks.
Right. So the first warning sign Kinexa sensors detect is an increase in transition time.
Transition time, like the fraction of a second between pulling your tennis racket back and starting the upward swing.
Precisely. In any complex automated movement, there are distinct phases. When pressure mounts, the data shows the body literally taking milliseconds longer to transition from one phase to the next.
So it's microscopic.
Completely. The athlete doesn't feel it, and the naked eye of the coach can't see it, but the automated rhythm is starting to stretch out.
Okay, the second signature they mention is a loss of fluidity.
Yeah, this is the degradation of the schema we just talked about. System 2 is starting to interfere with System 1. The movement stops looking like a flowing river and starts looking a bit disjointed, almost like a robotic step-by-step process.
Like they're overthinking it.
Because they are. The harmony of the movement breaks because the nervous system is no longer firing in a perfectly synchronized sequence.
And the third signature sounds like the literal definition of Hamlet. Kinexa looks for micropauses.
Yes, micropauses. These are actual measurable hesitations at the exact moment a motor decision needs to be made.
They just freeze for a split second.
Exactly. It is paralysis by analysis captured in the data. It is the body saying to be or not to be on a microscopic level just before executing a jump or a sudden change of direction.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If Kinexa is tracking all this data, the transition times, the fluidity, the micropauses, how do they actually apply it to an athlete's workout?
Well, they actually look to theater again.
Right. The sources explain that they structure their analysis of a training session the exact same way you would structure a theatrical play. They look at it through the lens of acts and a grand finale.
Because every training session, just like every game, follows a narrative arc. The analysis always begins with Act 1. The exposition.
The beginning of the session, basically the baseline.
Exactly. At the beginning of a training block, the athlete's body is playing its absolute best role. They're completely fresh, there is no accumulated physical fatigue, and more importantly, the cognitive load is low.
So they have everything available to them.
Yes. The athlete has their full neuromotor quality available.
This is when they look like the idealized version of themselves. Kinexa records this specific period to establish what they call the reference signature.
Right, the gold standard.
It gives the software the baseline of what that specific athlete's perfect fluidity and transition times look like. But, anyone who's read a play knows Act Y is just a setup. The real truth of a Shakespearean tragedy is never revealed in the opening scene when everyone is calm and happy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the truth is always revealed in the final acts. The resolution. Because as the session goes on, fatigue sets in, the consequences pile up, and the pressure mounts.
You can't fake it anymore.
Exactly. ACT allows an athlete to compensate. If they have a slight weakness, their fresh nervous system can mask it. But by Act V, you can't compensate. Fatigue strips away the mask, leaving the nervous system completely exposed.
That is when Kinexa looks for those specific breakdowns. The sources note they're watching for the movement schema to actively degrade in the later sets of an exercise.
They're watching the data just fall apart.
Right. They watch for the athlete's timing to desynchronize under the specific pressure of simulated competition. They even track physical asymmetry, like an athlete unconsciously starting to favor one side of their body over the other when an opponent suddenly ramps up the pressure.
And that physical degradation in the final acts is the true measure of the athlete's capacity. The pressure strips away the conscious control, and you are left only with the foundational stability of their nervous system.
Okay, so we've established how athletes fail. We've got Hamlet freezing, Macbeth rushing, and Kinexa measuring the exact millisecond the file gets corrupted.
Right.
But what is the ideal state they're actually trying to achieve? Dr. Delong's presentation brilliantly turns back to Shakespeare for the answer, introducing one more character, Cordelia, from the play King Lear.
She is the perfect example, because she provides this amazing contrast to the chaos around her.
Because King Lear is a chaotic play.
Incredibly chaotic. In King Lear, you have the king himself who completely loses his footing and just crumbles under the weight of his tragic reality. And you have his daughters, Goneril and Regan, who are constantly overacting, overcompensating, and basically performing their emotions falsely.
But amidst all of that collapsing and overacting, Cordelia remains steadfast. Her presence isn't a performance. It is pure stability.
She doesn't overreact, she just holds her ground.
Right.
And that kind of profound stability translates directly into the ultimate goal of biomechanics. In clinical terms, Cordelia represents neuromotor robustness.
So what does this all mean? Neuromotor robustness. That sounds like something you'd want built into, like, the landing gear of a commercial airplane.
That's actually a great way to think about it. An airplane's landing gear has massive shock absorbers, so the cabin stays perfectly level and stable even when the wheels are violently striking the runway at high speeds.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Neuromotor robustness is your nervous system's shock absorber. It is the ability to maintain the quality of your movement, to maintain that act a reference signature, even when the emotional runway gets incredibly chaotic. It keeps the movement smooth when all the psychological alarms are blaring.
But how does an athlete actually train for that? Because you can't just tell someone, hey, try to be more like Cordelia and less like Hamlet.
Right, that doesn't work.
If Kinexa is providing all this data about when the shock absorbers fail, what does the coach actually do with that information?
The takeaway is a fundamental shift in how we approach high-stakes training. The goal of using Kinexa isn't to create an environment where the athlete never feels pressure.
Because you can't.
You can never remove the pressure from a championship final. The pressure is just a feature of the environment.
So the goal is stress inoculation.
Yes, exactly. Coaches use the data to deliberately inject stress and cognitive load into the training by identifying exactly when and how the body begins to Hamletize its movements.
Like, let's say Kinexa shows an athlete's transition time slows down specifically during the 8th set when a defender is rushing them.
Right. Then the coach can push right up to that specific boundary. They train the nervous system to process that exact chaotic scenario while forcing it to maintain the act-eye movement schema.
So they build up a tolerance.
They're deliberately building the capacity to perform despite the pressure. They're training the nervous system to remain Cordelia even when the environment demands a tragedy.
That is amazing. To summarize the core thesis of Dr. Delong and Kinexa's presentation, hundreds of years ago, William Shakespeare placed characters on a literal wooden stage. He applied intense emotional pressure to them to see what it would reveal about human nature, knowing that while words can deceive, the physical body simply cannot lie.
It's all right there in the movement.
Right. And today, Kinexa is doing the exact same thing with advanced sensors and high-frequency data, measuring what pressure reveals in the bodies of elite athletes. Pressure doesn't necessarily create failure out of nowhere. Pressure simply reveals what the training has built.
It exposes the foundation.
Exactly. It reveals whether your foundation has neuromotor robustness or if it is held together by conscious thought that will just snap the moment the stakes get too high.
So the next time you find yourself in a high-pressure situation, whether it's stepping up to a podium for a massive presentation or just trying to navigate a really tense conversation, Pay attention to your own physical responses. Are you starting to Hamletize your actions? Does your transition time between thoughts or movements slow down? Pay attention to your own micropauses. Your body might be betraying your stress before your conscious mind even registers it. Which Shakespeare character does your body become under pressure?
That is a phenomenal question to carry into your day. You really have to wonder if you're freezing, rushing, or managing to hold steady like Cordelia. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the intersection of classical theater and modern biomechanics. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective on how you move through the high-stakes moments in your own life. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the ideas that shape our world. Until then, keep an eye on your micropauses.